Hi everybody, and welcome back to Soundwell Guitar. My name is Brandon, and today we're going to be talking about basic chords. Basic chords. If you don't know what a chord is, I'll explain. It's pretty simple. Our previous exercises involved playing one note, like that. That was on the first lesson. When you play more than one note at the same time, that is what would be known as a chord. Now, when playing these chords, there are various formations that we create with the left hand when strumming them. Those are what I'm going to show you today. That tends to be the most complicated part about chord playing on the guitar, is the left hand. So we're going to do 3 chords today that involves only strumming these 3 strings. 3, 2, and 1. The first chord that we're going to do today is known as the G chord. Now the G chord involves taking our third finger, remember the fingering system, 1, 2, 3, 4. We take that third finger and we put it on the 3rd fret. 1, 2, 3. Once I place my finger on the string behind the 3rd fret, I'm ready to play my chord. I take my pick and I strum from the 3rd string all the way across to the 1st. And there's my first chord named G. Like in previous lessons, I've always shown you how we can write these ideas on paper, also how to read them. That's what we're going to do now. As you can see, this piece of paper has 3 boxes on them. 1, 2, 3. Each of these boxes is meant to represent a portion of the neck of the guitar. To a lot of people, when they see that, they just look like waffles or boxes with lines through them. But I'm going to show you what part of the guitar it is. There's the headstock of a guitar, and there's the fretboard. See, as I line it up over the first box, you can start to see the angle that we're meant to see the guitar at. You see how the strings, when I hold this picture up like this, they're going vertical and the frets are horizontal. These boxes have vertical lines and horizontal lines. That's meant to represent the frets and the strings. See, the diagram doesn't have the fancy headstock. We don't really need that in the diagram. Even acoustic guitar. These diagrams apply to the acoustic guitar as well. So there we've established that these diagrams for these chords has the guitar at that angle. And when I play my G chord, my 3rd finger's like that. I'm now going to write on our diagram where the 3rd finger goes. See, I just put a circle there behind the 3rd space. Now, how would we know that that's supposed to be the 3rd finger that plays that? Well, I'm going to write a number 3 just above that line. That is the line that represents the string. Now, as I established earlier on in the video, there's more than one note to a chord. So far, our diagram only reflects one note. I'm now going to show how the other notes are going to be conveyed in the diagram. The 2 zeros that I wrote to the left of the 3 indicate that those strings, strings 2 and 3, are not going to have a left-hand finger on them, but the pick will still strum them. The other strings that do not have a number written above them are not to be strummed. Now I can further emphasize this by simply putting X's over those strings. And then the name of our chord. G. Sounds like that. It's a little bit more of the happier sounding chords. So, being that it has that happier sound to it, try to remember this musical term, major. This chord is not only referred to as a G chord, it can also be referred to as a G major chord, implying a specific tonality that this chord is going to possess. And for now, we'll just say it's more of the happier sounding chords. All right, our next chord that we're going to do is going to be the C chord. The C chord is played by placing your first finger and the first fret on the second string. This is a perfect example of how using the extreme tip is extremely important when playing chords, because the first finger is now crammed in between the third and the first string. The first finger is crammed between the first string and the third string, and those strings are going to need to ring out when we strum this chord. When we strum, again, strings 3, 2, and 1, starting with the third string to the 1, aim for the floor, it's a downstroke motion, sounds like this. I'm going to write that one on the page. There's our C chord, now written on the diagram for future reference. We're now going to practice strumming the G chord. I'm going to set up my G chord, and I'm going to start strumming it, that is from the third string to the first, going in with a downstroke motion, and I'm going to strum it evenly. We talked about in one of the previous videos playing things in time, and we tapped our foot and we did the down up strokes. Well, now we're just doing all downstrokes. So it's important to note that for now, when we have a downstroke, let's make that downstroke also on the foot tap. And so we're just going to strum our chord while tapping our foot. The reason for this is to create an even rhythm. Also notice I'm not playing it really fast. The next thing we're going to want to do is map out our strumming or our foot tapping, however you want to call it. We're going to map out the meter. And we're going to do this by counting the foot taps, and we'll do them in segments of 4. It oftentimes helps to count out loud when doing this technique so that we can remember where we're at in the count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so on. I'm going to write this on paper now so that you can see how it would look if it were written down for future reference. In our new diagram, which these diagrams are oftentimes referred to as a chart, you can see that there are forward slashes in between segments with a straight line. Each of these segments is what is known as a measure. At the beginning of our measure, I wrote the number 4. This is to tell you right from the start that we're going to be doing these measures in a count of 4. Now this dictates the foot tap. The foot tap will happen 4 times in each box, and they will be even. /1 is beat 1 and you strum the chord. /2, beat 2, strum the chord. Beat 3, beat 4, we strum the chord for each beat. I think you get the idea. Now I'll play that once again, tapping my foot. And why don't you look at the chart while I strum it so you can follow along and see how this correlates to the actual playing of the guitar. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it's done. Double bar line shows the exercise is over. Or if it were a song, the song is over. Well, a lot of people see this and right away they get it. It was 3 measures and strum the chord 4 times. And they say, well, I'm going to just strum the chord 12 times and I've got the chart mastered. And they're not wrong, but the only thing is they're not really learning to read a chart. One can easily get lost when playing rhythm if they're not counting in smaller increments such as 3s or 4s, in this case, counting in 4s. If we were to count to 12, I guarantee you most people get lost somewhere by like 9 or 10, especially if you're on stage and your nerves get the better of you and you're trying to keep track of how many times you strum a chord and you're strumming some big number like 12, or it could get even worse, could be 20. Anyhow, it's always best to keep it into small increments, and in this case, we went with the 4 count. Also, it's very easy to pick this up right away and say, well, and then I'm going to strum the chord 4 times and 3, in 3 sections of that, and not bother looking at the chart. I get it, it's very simple, it's easy to memorize, but playing your chord and strumming it while reading the chart can be very beneficial because you're now training your hand, that is the right hand, where those strings are. So a lot of times we feel like we have to look at our hand when we're strumming the chord, but what we want to do is develop a mind's eye for where the strings are, so the pick just knows where to go. Now, I don't know if you know what a mind's eye is. Some people haven't heard that term. We all have one. And I can prove to you that you have a mind's eye. Touch your nose. It's right there, right? You didn't need a mirror to look at it. You can't see your nose on your face, but you know where it is. That's your mind's eye, helping you find where something is without looking at it. And that's true with the guitar as well. We want to develop that mind's eye for where the strings are. I'm not saying you can't ever look at the guitar when playing. You're going to have to, especially a lot of times left-hand things. But again, when we're reading the chart, if we resist the temptation to keep looking down at our picking hand and just follow along all those slashes and strum along and keep the count, it's going to make us better at reading charts and playing with precision and not relying on our eyes. You've heard the saying, the hand is quicker than the eye. Well, it's very true when playing guitar. So you want your hands to find those strings, not your eyes. Okay, we're going to do one more chord. This one is a little more labor intensive with the left hand. It's going to start out kind of like the C chord did, with our first finger on the 2nd string and the 1st fret. But now we're going to add 2 fingers to it. I'm going to add my 2nd finger to the 3rd string behind the 2nd fret, and then add my 3rd finger to the same fret, the 2nd fret, but the 1st string. Now I'm just going to simply strum the same 3 strings we've been strumming this whole lesson. Strings 3, 2, and 1. There it is. Now that chord has somewhat of a more unusual sound as opposed to our previous happy major chords like G and our C. This one has something a little bit different added to it. I won't go into detail about all of that, but we'll just talk about the name for a second. It's called D7, the number 7 after it. I didn't make that name up. That is the official name. Whenever you see a chord that has that number 7 written after it, I always expect it to have just a little bit of a different sound to it. I'm going to write that one down on the chart. There it is, D7. And you can see that there's 3 circles written on the diagram indicating placement of the left-hand fingers, and the left-hand fingers being written above, the 2 on the 3rd string, the 1 on the 2nd, and the 3rd on the 1st string. Now I recommend that all 3 of these chords be practiced separately at first. When you're doing the G, practice that, strumming that with our chart. 4/4 count, nice and slow, and then move on and practice strumming the C. Same thing, reading the chart. Really listen carefully to make sure that all those voicings or notes or strings, whatever you want to call them, are all ringing through. Chances are, for a beginner, your first C chord might kind of sound like this. And that's because my thumb suddenly crept up here and my finger isn't quite on its tip anymore. But I get on its tip, I get my thumb straight, my wrist down. Now I've got a nice, clean sounding first string. So listen for that when you're practicing these chords separately to make sure that each one is getting its optimal sound. I'm going to chart out the exercise for each of those chords individually now. There they are, 3 separate exercises involving practicing each chord separately. Now, I didn't pick these 3 chords at random. I picked 3 chords for you that, when played together in a chart, will actually sound like a song. Because when chords are combined together, we start to tell a story. If I were to write a song off of 1 chord, chances are this song would be really boring after a while. Most songs will use at least 2 chords, if not more. You see already, I'm tired of that sound. But when we start combining chords, we are putting together what in musical terms is known as a progression. And again, that's where all of a sudden our chords link together, and when played in time, it starts to tell a story. There's a musical phrase there. It'll sound like an actual song. I'll demonstrate. I'm going to strum the G chord 4 times, then the C chord 4 times, and then the D7 chord 4 times. Here we go. Doesn't quite sound resolved. That's the beauty of these progressions, is it's leading your ear back to the chord we started on. So really making that phrase complete. Getting your chord progressions right like this is oftentimes like being a clever poet that can rhyme all their phrases. Listen again when I play it, how the D7 leads your ear back to the first chord, G, and then the G creates resolution. So our progression is great for writing music because we have this tension and release kind of feeling going on. Okay. I get that at first learning these chords, just being able to strum each one individually, get the timing down, keep the chord clean is going to be a challenge in itself. Then just jumping straight to doing these chords and switching in time, that's going to be a huge challenge. There's more than likely going to be a big gap when you try to switch from one to the next. See that? One of the things that can hold us back when switching from one chord to the next is, again, relying on our eyesight. If we're requiring visual confirmation that we have the chord before we're ready to strum it, it's going to slow us down big time. Let me show you what that looks like. See how I was more more than ready to strum the C chord right when I fretted it, but again, I needed to confirm I had it, and I took this big break. Here's a good way to start strumming those chords and transitioning to one to the next on time. And we'll do it where we don't have to strum on every beat, but the beats will still be there. I'm going to write that on paper to help you understand a little bit more what I'm talking about. See the bottom rhythm that I wrote out? There's one slash at the beginning of the first measure for the G chord. Then there's nothing after that. That is an indication that you're free for beats 2, 3, and 4 to just transition to the next chord. But it's very important that you keep the count going. And the same goes for the other chords as well. This is what it will sound like. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. See how much easier that is at first to start out that way and still learn to count and transition on the beat. This is very important for proficient chord playing. Then progress to the next level, which would involve strumming the chord on beats 1 and beat 2, leaving 3 and 4 open. I'll write that one down. There we have it. 2 slashes in each measure, strummed on beat 1 and 2, leaving 3 and 4. 2 beats time for us to transition to our next chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sure you've guessed what the next level is going to be. We'd be strumming on beats 1, 2, and 3, leaving 4 open, only 1 beat now of time for us to transition. Still a little easier than strumming on all 4 beats, but getting a little bit more difficult, sounding like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you've mastered all these different stages of playing and transitioning these chords in time, we'll go to the final one, which is strumming on all 4 beats. It sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there it is. Our chart now contains 4 strums in each measure, strumming each chord 4 times and transitioning. At the last measure, we resolve the whole progression back in the chord that we started. Getting your chords down with the transitions from G to C, C to D7, and D7 back to the G. That's when you have it mastered. I hope this lesson's been helpful. I'll see you next time.